Okay, well, thank you to Mayor Mat Siscoe from the great city of St. Catharines for coming on today to the 905 podcast. Thank you, Mayor Siscoe, for taking the time to discuss this very important topic with us. Thank you.
No, I'm happy to be here.
I know your time is precious, and we have you just for 30 minutes or so we'll dive right into it. The letter that we're talking about today has been met with a lot of criticism. A lot of critics are citing that the notwithstanding clause is a pretty extreme measure to solve the encampment crisis that are in 905 cities. It's only been used a handful of times since 1982, and yet this current Ontario PC government has used it three distinct times since taking office. You're asking essentially for a fourth. Why did you choose to request this over asking, say, for more legislative powers as a municipality to build homes to or build affordable homes for encampments?
Well, I will say a couple things. First of all, the letter asks for significantly more than just the use of notwithstanding clause. I would argue 80% of it is talking about the need for, increased services, increased mental health and addiction services, trying to keep people that are in these situations, maybe they're homeless, they have an addiction issue, out of the court system by being able to divert them into other areas. And that seems to be getting lost in a lot of this. I've heard the criticism, well, why aren't you asking for more money for affordable housing or for shelter space? We have. I mean, I've been in office as a mayor for 2 years. I used to say it took up about 20% of my day, and then it was 30%. I'm at about 50% of my day now is just dealing with issues related to homelessness. And it's ironic to me because the municipal, as in the city level of government, and especially in a two-tier area like St. Catharines and Niagara, we have the least to do with this. Like, we really have no mandate. We have no mechanisms, no funding mechanisms to be able to deal with this. And so we're left at the mercy of the region, the province, and the federal government to deal with things that are very clearly, when it comes to mental health, when it comes to homelessness, when it comes to drug addiction, very clearly in their purview. And that's what Solve the Crisis was all about. Big city mayors came out with the Solve the Crisis campaign, and everybody agreed, including, a lot of the detractors now saying this is a humanitarian crisis. Well, sometimes a humanitarian crisis maybe requires, very big steps to try and deal with it. When it comes to the request for the use of the notwithstanding clause, I mean, really, it comes down to the court decisions that we've experienced, right? Last year we had the Waterloo and the Kingston decisions, amongst others, that basically have tied municipalities' hands and said, in effect, you have no capacity to be able to regulate these encampments. You have no capacity to be able to dictate where and when they can take place. And from my perspective, that's an error by the court, because I have capacity as the mayor of a community. My city council and I have the ability to regulate all other aspects of what goes on in the city, in terms of where and when they can take place. We dictate where housing can be built. We dictate where, a shopping mall can go and whether there's going to be a road over here or over there, whether it's going to have a bike lane, but in this unique aspect, they're saying, oh, but in city parks or on city property, unless you can offer shelter spaces, I'll point out that at our level, the city level, we have no capacity to offer.
Mm-hmm.
But unless we can offer those spaces, well, then we can't regulate where the encampments go. And that's untenable. Like, that situation can't actually occur. And so what we're saying with the letter is, listen, provincial government, maybe you need to pass some legislation that says these are the roles and responsibilities of cities to be able to regulate where these encampments go. And if it's necessary to use the notwithstanding clause so that holds up and we get some sort of certainty as to what exactly it is we can do, well, then this is an appropriate case, I think, for a clause that's a part of the Constitution for a reason.
Well, okay. There's a lot there. I think we'll slowly unpack that as we go on here.
Sure.
You said about building housing, and I think that's what it comes down to, is ultimately, like, we need to build housing for these people to live safe and secure. This year, St. Catharines received $25.7 million from the Federal Housing Accelerator Fund, as well as $2.3 million from the province's Building Faster Fund.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, according to Global News, provincial housing starts across the province are just plummeting. We are not meeting our targets. For example, they reported that 81,000 starts were logged across the province, and we need 125,000 per year to meet our provincial targets for housing. I'm not putting this entirely on you, obviously, but to me, like, the bigger problem is, how do we find ways to eliminate those barriers to meet our targets? There's something holding us back from meeting that. And as a mayor and the other signatories of that letter, my question is, why wouldn't that be the priority? Like, let's eliminate that structural inability to get this done.
And that's a fair comment, except that, when I look at my municipality, it's hard to find any structural barriers that we're putting up. When it comes to development charges, which seem to be, the big one that's always thrown on municipalities. In St. Catharines, we add $13,000 to the price of a single family home. If you add in the regional development charges, it works out to about $40,000 or $50,000. I mean, in the scale of development charges across the province of Ontario, we're about as low as it gets. In terms of structural barriers, I haven't had anybody actually identify what they would happen to be. We have an Ontario building code that we hold developers to. They have to build to the code. We have a zoning policy, which in St. Catharines is incredibly permissive. We have no height limits in the downtown. We have no parking requirements. I think a lot of people want to look at levels of government to blame when it comes to the lack of housing starts, when everybody seems to recognize that the supply chain has gone pretty crazy over the last couple of years. The inflation that comes along with building homes has gone, it was out of control for a while. Hopefully it's starting to tamp down a little bit. Interest rates were very high. And so consumers weren't purchasing units when they were being offered. We were told earlier this year that the average price without land costs just to build right now was $450,000 a door. Well, the affordability index, that line of affordability, 30%, that's significantly lower than $450,000. So when we look at those housing starts, I mean, this is a global economy. The costs and inputs that go into building those homes are a part of that global economy. The reality is, and we've known this for years, we have a skilled labor shortage. So the labor costs associated with it are higher than they've ever been. When you talk to folks in the development industry, they'll be very clear that, this is unfortunately a product of that economic situation that we find ourselves in. And as interest rates come down, we're very hopeful those units will get built. When it comes to the money we got from the provincial and the federal government, I will say the provincial money, very explicitly, we need that money to build the infrastructure to be able to support the housing that we're trying to get built. We're an aging city. We're going to turn 150 in a few years. We're taking pipes out of the ground in some parts of the city that are as old as the city. So we have to have that money to be able to replace infrastructure. On the Housing Accelerator Fund side of things, we're implementing a number of different programs. We brought in a very generous grant for people to build accessory dwelling units for that missing middle style housing, the backyard in-law suites and things like that. And we're continuing to try and roll out programs like that. But at the end of the day, it's the private sector that's going to build a lot of these homes. From my perspective, I will say I've also pushed for public sector housing, for the affordability piece through Niagara Regional Housing. We need to be building more, and we need to be building every single year as opposed to these stops and starts and fits. We're right now in the process. The city gave the region of Niagara a large piece of property to build bridge housing units, supportive housing units for folks that are being taken out of homelessness, along with an affordable housing component. So the city is doing what it can, but I can't force the region to build faster. I'm one vote there. And so we can't just look at one area or another. There's a bunch of different things that we need to be working on.
I mean, I would, when it comes to municipalities having very limited power to initiate housing, to cause housing to happen, I would absolutely be on your side, so to speak. I would defend you. I mean, this kind of idea that the cities stand in the way of development and can kind of wave a magic wand and cause development to happen is just, I think, very unfair on municipalities. The problem I have here is that you're not asking for powers to help you to cause development to happen, or asking for money to build new shelters or better places for homeless people to go. What you're asking for is for the provincial government to throw out a court decision that was made, we're meant to have independent courts and so on, to throw that into the garbage and then give you the power to just move people wherever you see fit. And you're not asking for, well, we need more mental health treatment, we need money for that, or you're not asking for, we need the power to build affordable housing or socialized housing or subsidized housing. You're not saying any of that. You're saying we want the power to kick people off and, if need be, incarcerate them.
So I will push back on one piece. We are actually asking. The letter asks that we strengthen the system of community-based and residential mental health care and to expand the service to treat those who have severe and debilitating addictions. But additionally, we've been asking for this for, like I said, the 2 years that I've been in this position. We've asked repeatedly. We passed motions. We've supported calls from other levels of advocacy, AMO and FCM. Like, municipalities are asking for all of those things. And that won't change, because I fully recognize, and I will just say, I agree with the fundamental principle of the Waterloo ruling. The idea that we should not be tearing down all the encampments if we don't have somewhere for people to go. What we're asking for is the ability to regulate where those encampments go. I'm going to give you an example that happened here in St. Catharines just in the last few months. We had a strip of land between 2 residential properties on a street in the middle of the city. And an encampment popped up on it. And I think at its most, there were 12 tents, and they were leaned up against people's backyards. They were leaned up, against the fences of people's front yards. One of the encampments had a very large dog, which frankly was intimidating to a lot of people. We are at shelter capacity in Niagara. That's the reality. No matter how many times I ask for more shelter spaces, I keep getting the same answer, that we're building what we can, quote unquote, afford to. And I've been the guy who stood up and said, listen, if we need more money, I'll take the bullets and stand up and argue it needs to be on the levy. I'll do that because we need more shelter spaces. But we didn't have shelter space. And the Waterloo ruling says, well, we can't stop that. That encampment has to exist. So now we're asking all the people that are living in those properties, you have to deal with this. And we know the social issues that come along with those encampments. And it's not everybody. I'm the first one to say there are a lot of people that are just trying to survive. But we also know that there is drug trafficking, and there is human trafficking, and there are weapons issues, and a lot of other issues that go along with those encampments. So what we're asking for here is give us the ability to regulate it. Guelph has brought in a public space use bylaw. And I'll be honest, I've read their bylaw. I think it's a fantastic bylaw, except that based on the Waterloo and Kingston rulings, I don't think that they can actually enforce it, because they're not allowed to say where these things can take place. I'm the first one to say, if you don't have shelter space, then it's a ridiculous idea to think you just tear down all the encampments and the homelessness problem goes away. That's a nonsense argument, and nobody's trying to make that argument. What we're saying is,
well, I mean, in which case are you naive to have written this letter in the way that you did, which kind of implies that. I mean, there's nothing in here criticizing the government, the provincial government, for their failure, say, to provide this. The number of homeless people, the number of people living in encampments has skyrocketed. Well, that hasn't happened out of a vacuum. People don't choose to suddenly, all of a sudden, people. Thousands of people have decided to live in city parks for some reason that they never did before. They have been pushed into that by the circumstances that they're living in. So surely, the solution is to deal with that cause rather than this. I mean, like, at the very least, I mean, maybe you just needed to write a longer letter that sets out more of the context rather than just, as a high-profile letter,
I will repeat, like, we've been sending the other letters and we've been sending the other motions repeatedly for the 2 years I've been in office. Should we deal with the root causes? Of course we should. And should there be provincial funding increase to allow us to deal with those root causes? Of course there should. But in this situation, we're focusing on this piece of it as well, because it's an absurd situation to say that municipalities can't regulate where and when these encampments take place. We've had problems, with public land next to schools, where encampments are popping up next to schools. Like, these are the things that are scaring my community, and they're creating a very real sense of a lack of public safety.
Let's move forward a bit on this and say, let's say the premier acquiesced to the letter. He says, okay, I'm going to pass legislation and give the cities the notwithstanding clause power to remove these encampments. How does this work? What will St. Catharines do once this legislation is empowered? What will you do and to move these people? Like, where do you put these people now that you're able to remove the encampments? I think that's a big question everybody has, is tell us how this works.
So if we were given the power, we would probably look at something along the lines of Guelph's public space bylaw. Their public space use bylaw identifies some specific areas where encampments can't be. In our case, I can tell you right now, we have St. Paul Street is sort of the main downtown commercial street. We've had tents popping up in that area over the course of the last couple of years. Makes it very difficult for business to be transacted. It makes it very difficult for the residents who live in the downtown to be able to get around and do things. We would set that up as an area that, no, you can't set up a tent on St. Paul Street because it's a main thoroughfare. But there's a park adjacent to St. Paul Street, Richard Pierpoint Park, where we've had a lot of tents over the last couple of years as this problem has gotten bigger. And I would imagine, that there are portions of that park that are going to wind up being used for this purpose, because I think that the municipalities need to be as permissive as possible and identify, okay, these are key areas. A tent encampment in this location is going to cause demonstrable harm to the community. But a tent location in this area, well, it's right next to the first area, but also, will it bother people? Yes, but homelessness should bother us. It should bother everybody that exists in our community, and we don't have places for these folks to live. So my goal, and my understanding in talking to the mayor of Guelph, is they wrote theirs with as much permissiveness as possible. That would also be my goal, and I think probably every mayor's goal. We recognize that we can't just tear down encampments with no plan. We would be identifying those core areas where it's damaging to the community if we have homeless encampments popping up on them, but with an eye being as permissive as possible in other parts of the city on public land.
I hear what you're saying, and what you're saying on the face of it makes a lot of sense. And I think it's the average listener is listening to this saying, this is very reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
The problem that I think people are having is the fact that the notwithstanding clause is not a subtle, it's not a scalpel, it's a sledgehammer, it's a bludgeon. It takes away people's rights. Now, I want to push back on your assertion of you want to copy the mayor or city of Guelph's bylaw, which on the face I think sounds pretty reasonable. That has not been challenged in court. You're operating this on the assumption that it will be challenged because of the Waterloo ruling. Yet the Waterloo ruling was kind of conditional on cities need to be able to provide a place for people to go. So my question is, why not let Guelph or St. Catharines pass a similar bylaw, enforce it, and test the courts and say, we're trying to be reasonable, we're trying to protect these people's rights and the rights of other St. Catherine Knights.
Catholics, yeah, you got it.
There we go. But there are rights to security of the person, obviously, safety of their families, their homes. Why not test that in the courts as opposed to saying we're going straight to the notwithstanding clause that takes away these people's rights? Because you say you want to use it, other cities will say, well, no, we'll just throw them in jail, because that's what this allows you to do. You can move them wherever you want.
Well, okay, I'm gonna push back. There's no suggestion in here that we throw them in jail. And in fact, I would argue that the letter actually is pretty explicit that we're trying to find means other than jail for folks who find themselves in difficult situations but are breaking the law. To your point, I think it's a fair point, except that Kingston did that. Kingston went down that path. Kingston said, well, listen, we understand folks need to be able to stay somewhere, but we're saying for the public use of the park, between these hours, we're saying that the encampments can't stay up permanently. But I mean, these are supposed to be temporary encampments. Like that's what I think the Waterloo ruling refers to, these temporary shelters. And I said, well, okay, we're going to say between these hours, like you got to clean up and allow everybody else to have the use of the public park. And the court struck it down and said, no, you can't do that. So at a certain point, it becomes, okay, we're kind of lunging in the dark here. Like then this is why we need the province to create some form of legislation that helps municipalities understand what are the lines. Because otherwise, we're all instituting bylaws, waiting for a challenge, spending a whole bunch of money in legal costs, trying to figure out what's right. That's not a really effective way to run the system. Like I think residents across the province would be pretty upset if municipalities were playing whack-a-mole with bylaw legislation, trying to figure out what makes sense and what doesn't, because the courts have said, nope, can't do that. Oh, but maybe this, but not that. Like that's the function. We're creatures of the province. We're told this regularly. That's the function of the province then, is to say, okay, give us some certainty.
I absolutely get that, and you're 100% right. But I think what I'm getting from this discussion is that we're kind of just punting the core problem down the road. Is that these people are unhoused because either they can't afford the rent anymore, there's not enough affordable housing being built. This isn't your problem. I just say it is your problem, but it's not your fault. as a
I
municipality.
appreciate that. I appreciate that delineation because I think that's important for people to understand. Like the cities, like we're dealing with it.
Yeah,
But this isn't a result of anything we did.
absolutely. I don't think you or any others of the signatories should bear the brunt of the blame. But the solution seems to be, again, we're not, and this is, we're taking away somebody's constitutional rights in favor of something that, quite frankly, the province is not stepping up to the plate. Either they're not talking about giving you, the municipalities, the tools that you need and the funding mechanisms you need to really tackle this problem and find the solutions that are amenable to the citizens of St. Catharines, Oshawa, Oakville, etc. And we're not seeing that fight. And rather than say, well, the notwithstanding clause is an easy solution because we can take away somebody's right and put you somewhere that we think you would rather you go, rather than say, well, let's just build the housing that we need. Like my next question was going to be, why didn't you decide to request the notwithstanding clause be used to force developers or landlords to build the housing that you need where you want it to be built and to bring down rents to an affordable rate for people to stay housed? Why wasn't that solution rather than remove the rights of homeless people?
So I will say, like, that's not something that's even like I've never heard that suggestion. That seems like a far more intrusive. And if you give me a chance, I'll explain.
Absolutely.
Again, I'm not disagreeing with folks' ability to set up an encampment. Like, that's fundamentally like, and I will preface all of this by saying we need more housing, we need more affordable housing, we need more shelter beds, we need more bridge housing and supportive housing and transition housing. Full stop. That is a requirement in this province, and the provincial government is not meeting that need by any stretch. And we have been very clear with them that we need more of all of that, and they need to help fund that. And the federal government probably has to be a part of that as well. But what we're asking for is the ability to regulate where these encampments go. So we're not saying you can't have an encampment, you can't live. That's not the statement that's being made. What we're saying is we have to be able to control where these things go. What you're suggesting would be far more intrusive because now it's forcing people to do certain things with their private businesses in a way that, could cost them, reams of money and that they don't have. Like, because the reality, and I mentioned it at the very beginning, the reality is it's $450 a door for a single family home. Now, obviously, that's not the cost necessarily for a shelter unit, but there is still a cost and someone has to pay for that. So, that that's a far more intrusive step to take where we're simply saying, okay, I accept that you need to be able to stay somewhere. We're asking for the ability to say, you're not there. And again, like in a municipality, we're given that power in every other stretch. Like we make the decision where housing can go or where commercial enterprises can go, where a road goes, where a bike lane goes. We make those decisions. But in this case, we've been told, but you can't make a decision on this. And that those public properties that the taxpayers of the city and the residents in the city have helped to build over the course of, in our case, 150 years, well, they're just up for grabs and nobody gets to have a say about what goes on in those places. And I would argue that there's a violation there on behalf of everybody else's Section 7 charter rights as well. If I have a park which is absolutely unsafe and people don't want to walk through it, well, that's a violation of their Section 7 charter rights as well. I don't disagree with you that we need to be doing a better job and the province needs to step up on this to do a better job to fund the spaces. But in this case, like cities have been left in a position where we don't actually feel like we have another option. If there are other options that other levels of government can exercise, go for it. But I'm responding to the concerns of my community, and they're very real concerns when encampments are popping up next to schools or, into people's backyards. Like that's a real concern that the municipality has to respond to.
Absolutely. And I think we can all agree on this podcast, anyone listening, is that nobody wants encampments. They are unsafe. They're not wanted, and it's just not, nobody wants them. I would question this path that you and the other signatories are taking. Are you at all worried that if Premier Ford does give you this power, says, yep, I'm signing it, that this gives Premier Ford the option to kind of ignore the other things that you're talking about. You've made a strong case for needing funding for other things to give you powers to help encourage building, funding the development of our cities as we want them to develop. Yet the province isn't stepping up. You keep coming back to the province is not stepping up. They're not following through on this need that people have. Are you worried that if Doug Ford says, okay, I'm giving this the notwithstanding clause, he can ignore all the other demands that you're giving, saying, I'm giving notwithstanding clause to clean up your cities. Go ahead and do it. Now you're just incompetent at your jobs. Are you worried at all about that blowback from the province? And if so, how are you and the other signatories planning to address that?
Well, I mean, he could also not give us a notwithstanding clause and ignore everything else we're asking for also. Like, it's up to the current provincial government to make their decisions about what they're going to pay attention to and what they're not. And I can't dictate that, and I wouldn't pretend to anyways. I think that as mayors, we're in a very difficult situation, and we've asked for some guidance. That's ultimately what we're asking for. We're not saying that the notwithstanding clause needs to be used. If the government thinks that they can pass legislation that's going to hold up to the charter challenges, of course, that would be the best course of action. But we need some certainty because we're the ones who are dealing with this. And I've said this repeatedly when we talked about the Solve the Crisis campaign when it first came out. My point has always been, if you talk to city officials in any city that's dealing with homelessness, drug addiction, mental health crisis to any degree, there is a sense of urgency, which is higher than on any issue that I've experienced in my 15 years in politics. My provincial and federal counterparts don't feel that sense of urgency. They just don't. And so we are trying everything. And in this case, like, am I a little bit frustrated at the comments that were made, sort of pushing down and saying, well, the municipalities need to do this and they should put it in writing. Okay, here it is in writing. Like, I don't know how much more you want from us to explain that this is a crisis that actually needs to be dealt with. It's not this isn't something we've polled on. This isn't something that we're going to try and run election campaigns on. Nobody's re-election is hinging on, oh, but I got this. We're literally trying to fix situations in our communities that are causing real concerns for residents, but are also fundamentally unfair to the people that are stuck living in encampments right now. And
so, I mean, but given that, I mean, I just want to jump in quickly. It'll be the limited time we have, but so given that, why is it that some very prominent cities, if you're all on board with this, then where's Hamilton, where's Toronto, where's Mississauga in this? Why did they not sign up to this?
I look forward to the podcast you do with one of their mayors when they explain why they're not doing this. And listen,
we're delighted, but I mean, clearly they're not. The implication is that they don't think this letter was the right way to go. So why would that be? And I
respect that opinion. Like, I mean, ultimately, like, I understand everybody's coming at this from a different place. I respect those opinions. I disagree with them. I think that this is a step that needs to be taken at this point because I think the courts have overreached and they've tied cities' hands in a way that is untenable. So, I can't answer for the mayors of those other communities, but I know that 12 municipalities were in agreement with it. And, this is us saying to the province, listen, this is a step you may need to take, but we need some clarity here because we can't effectively run our communities if we don't have the ability to be able to say where these encampments take place.
Well, I think we're coming up on our time here, and we could clearly go on probably for the whole day discussing this back and forth because you're right. This is I think the top issue for not just St. Catharines, but I think every municipality in the province, possibly even in Canada, is how to deal with these encampments. Mayor Mat Siscoe from St. Catharines, thank you very much for your time. We are looking forward to seeing what happens with this going forward and how to approach this going forward. And all the best to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just want to say I appreciate your willingness to engage in the conversation and the fact that this is a very difficult debate and people are going to have very strong opinions on both sides. But I appreciate the fact that it was a good debate and a respectful debate. So thank you for that.
Thank you for your time.
Really great. Thank you.